Hi, welcome to video lecture 17. In this lecture, I'll continue to talk about Unit 7 of our textbook. More specifically, I'll concentrate on the inefficiency of monopoly and market power. Let's start with price discrimination. In the price discrimination, if the firm can correctly gauge the willingness to pay of each consumer, and if it can charge each consumer a different price, it can capture the entire surplus using price discrimination. This outcome is efficient but arguably unfair. Just like when Bruno makes a take it or leave it offer to Angela, if you can recall from our previous units. For example, in this pictures, you can discuss yourself or with your classmates that if you see a kind of price discrimination in markets, in flights, in cable TV and internet, and in colleges. Market power and profit margins. A firm's market power depends on its price elasticity of demand. And the equation for price elasticity of demand is percentage change in demand divided by the percentage change in price. If you notice, there is actually a negative sign at the beginning of the equation. Sometimes you may actually get the elasticity negative, and in order to actually interpret it like more concretely, we put another negative sign at the beginning so that the negatives are going to cancel each out, and then you can comment with the positive signs about the elasticity, if it is elastic or inelastic or unit elastic demand of elasticity. Just as a side note, I just wanted to share the role of minus sign here. A firm's profit margin is price minus marginal cost, and firms with more market power have larger profit margins. Price minus marginal cost divided by price is equal to 1 divided by the elasticity. And in order to understand this equation better, you may want to go and then check Econ 306 for the algebra part. And here you can pause the video for a second and then think about this, if the price setting firm a good institution or not. So price setting firms choose an inefficient price. Every transaction generates economic surplus, but the firm chooses a price that is greater than marginal cost, so not all mutually beneficial transactions are made. Price discrimination increases efficiency but may undermine fairness. In Unit 8, we are going to talk about the price-taking firms sell goods at an efficient price, and all firms sell goods at a price equal to their marginal cost. The competitive market price is efficient when externalities are absent. But the competitive markets are still not necessarily fair. And if you remember, we talked about how a union protested against British East India Company for the prices. And then this quote, "Why should a tiny island across the sea regulate the price of a tea?" comes from the previous lecture. Economic models can be precisely expressed in three ways. As an equation, we know y equals to fx, where y is a function of x. Mathematically, that's what it means. And in a table, you're seeing this labor input number of workers with the grain output. And then as a figure, you can actually draw these numbers here in the graph, like that. Number of farmers in the x-axis, and then kilograms of grain produced in the y-axis. And here, if you recall from my previous lecture, when I was talking about setting the price of beautiful cars, here red line represents demand curve, purple represents the marginal cost, and the blue represents the isoprofit A. As a set of equation, and then here you're seeing deadweight loss, and then MR with the green line before going to equation. And then again, the triangle like reddish color is the consumer surplus, whereas the purple trapezoid is the producer surplus. As a set of equation, 48,000 plus 1,000 Q plus 30 Q square. In order to find the average cost, we are dividing the total cost with Q. And then this is the right hand side, 48,000 divided by Q plus 1,000 plus 30Q is going to be our average cost. And marginal cost is going to be the derivative of total cost function with respect to Q, which is equal to 1,000 plus 60Q. And then willingness to pay 80,000 minus 80Q, which is also equals to our P. And total revenue is equal to P times Q, 80,000 Q minus 80 square, 80 Q square. So I'm sorry, the total revenue is 8,000 Q minus 80 Q square. And then marginal revenue is the derivative of total revenue with respect to Q, which is equal to 8,000 minus 160Q. So in order to find the Q and price, that profit is maximized when MR equals to MC. So 1,000 plus 60Q equals to 8,000 minus 160Q, which makes it 220Q equals to 7,000, and then Q is equal to around 32. And then with that, P is equal to 5,440, as we are finding it here in the point C, where MR equals to MC. And the profit which corresponds to this point is going to be 63,360. There's a kind of typo here. This is not 66 but 63 here. So in the previous slide, we have seen how to calculate average cost, marginal revenue, marginal cost, willingness to pay, price, and quantity. And now we can move on to market power. When it comes to market power, we actually remember a well-known economist, Augustin Cournot, who is actually very well known with his Cournot model, which we are not going to talk about now, but he is very well known with his game theoretic model. So a price-setting firm has market power. It sells a differentiated product. It sets its price above marginal cost. It generates deadweight lost. And the size of this deadweight lost depends on the degree of the firm's market power. The deadweight lost is large when the firm faces a steep demand curve, i.e. when the elasticity of demand low, and small when the firm faces a flat demand curve, i.e. when the elasticity of demand is high. So our model of a price-setting firm is very similar to Cournot's 1838 analysis. As I said, we are not going to talk about here, but this model of price setting is very similar to his analysis. So here in this figure, firms that face relatively elastic demand curves have little market power, low profit margins, and generate a small amount of deadweight loss. And then here on the right hand side, firms that face relatively inelastic demand curves have lots of market power, high profit margins, and generate a large number of deadweight loss. And how are we seeing that the firms are having actually relatively um, um, like elastic demand curve, inelastic demand curve. Here you're seeing in the left hand side, more elastic demand curve means the demand curve is more flatter, and the more inelastic demand curve means the demand curve is more steeper. And when it's flatter, we are having little market power, low profit margin, and a small amount of deadweight loss. When the firms are having steeper demand curves, they're going to have lots of market power, higher or larger amount of deadweight loss, and higher profit margins. And then here we can give an like automobile and cell phone for this example. So in perfect competition, firms face horizontal demand curves and have no market power, which we are going to be talking about in Unit 8. So when a firm sells a good with few close substitutes, the demand curve is more inelastic, giving the firm more market power and providing the firm with higher profits and resulting in a less efficient equilibrium. Policymakers may break up monopolies like through antitrust or regulate monopolies by setting rates. So here, for example, Standard Oil had immense market power until it was split into 34 separate companies in 1911 under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The EU prevented Volvo from merging with Scania in 2000 because it would have sold like 90% of trucks in some countries. And cartels like OPEC and De Beers use market power to raise prices. Um, um, and some nature monopolies exploit economies of scale to gain market power and set prices. Um, these are some examples of market power and how they have been regulated. So, what about innovation, IPRs, and advertising? And then here in the figure on the right hand side, you're seeing quarterly national advertising like expenditures of millions of US dollars on the x-axis and the market share in terms of percentage on the y-axis. And then these are the advertising expenditures and market share of breakfast cereals in Chicago in 1991-1992 period. So market power increases with product differentiation. Firms can sometimes differentiate their product through innovation, establishing intellectual property rights, advertising, and cereal companies spend 5.5% of their revenue on advertising. So, like after thinking about advertising part and how cereal companies are spending like a kind of relatively big amount of their revenue to advertising, you can pause for a second and then think about if the advertising is a good institution or not. And now, after talking about like advertising, we can go a little bit like kind of subsection of advertising and then see um, like how information and manipulation is used in advertising. So economist Matthew Shum studied advertising in breakfast cereals. Advertising provided little information. Advertising increased demand more efficiently than discounts. And in 1991, kids recognized Joe Camel better than Mickey Mouse or Fred Flintstone. The US limits, in terms of advertising, the American Government limits what products can be advertised, where advertising is allowed, and who can be exposed to advertising or not. Um, and here we can like again pause for a second and then think about how much advertising are you you are exposed to. Okay, after the advertising, now we can talk about market failure. When firms set prices, the allocation of goods is inefficient. For some potential buyers, marginal cost is less than willingness to pay, which is less than price. Too little is purchased. This market failure is the result of limited competition due to advertising or intellectual property rights, i.e., the policy, and decreasing average costs that make competition winner take all, like natural monopoly case. So overall, in this unit like 7, the firms and its customers, we have talked about or studied how firms producing differentiated goods choose to price and quantity of output to maximize their profit. We also worked on how they maximize their profit, or when they maximize their profit, what is MC, and how we calculate them along with elasticity of demand. So before the exam and for this chapter specifically, reviewing the concepts below will be helpful. So for example, differentiated product, economies of scale, cost function, willingness to pay, price setting, demand curve, consumer and producer surpluses, deadweight loss, market failure, elasticity of demand, profit margin, and others. But these are the most important concepts of this unit. So if you remember in homeworks like 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, you have worked on power and distribution, Lorentz and Gini, and labor discipline. And in homework 2.4, you're going to work on price setting firm. And then this is how your homework 4 is going to look like um, from A through M. So you are going to work on this for your homework in 2.4. So